Hey guys, welcome. Hope you had a good weekend. I'm spending some time now on a lovely Sunday evening, so I can get an hour lecture ready for you guys for tomorrow. Should have your tests back and ready for you hopefully by Tuesday, so we can go over those in a little bit. Just one other note I want to throw out there, and I don't know if any of you guys seen this, but I went and saw the movie Bridge of Spies this weekend. It's the Spielberg Tom Hanks movie that is out, and it is sort of a historical timepiece about the Cold War and the powers able exchange that we'll be talking about once we get to the Cold War. But it is very good, so I would highly recommend it if you guys have some free time. Today, of course, we're switching into our new unit, Unit 4. And our unit today, or this unit, focuses mostly on Andrew Jackson, the Jacksonian Age, which is going to be a really actually interesting age. I really enjoyed teaching Jackson because he is a very polarizing president. So much so that we're talking about taking him off the $20 bill here when his time is up here in the next couple of years. So a lot of good, but a lot of bad also with Jackson. So we're going to get into the age of Jackson here and mass democracy. So as you can see here from our keys to the chapter slide, and we won't get into all of this today, but there's quite a bit to talk about here when it comes to the age of Jackson. Starting with actually John Quincy Adams's presidency and the corrupt bargain, and then going all the way down to the election of 1840. And a lot of what we're going to see here, particularly when you see here the nullification crisis, is going to have a lot to do with the Civil War. And as you can see, we're going to end here at around 1840. So, Civil War starts 1860, 1861. So we're getting up into that time. We're sort of inching ever closer to the Civil War. So I want you guys to keep that in your back of a mind, because as we go through this unit and up again as we get closer to the Civil War, I want you guys paying attention to that causation and trying to see if you can see those causes, those building blocks that are going to lead us to the Civil War. And the nullification crisis might be that first step, but we will get there eventually. But let's go ahead and start off with John Quincy Adams and the corrupt bargain. Okay, so when we left off, we had, remember, our Air of Good Feelings, right, where we had all of the political parties basically coming together, all the nation coming together behind one political party, the Republicans. And we've heard John Quincy Adams' name before, not only because he, of course, is John Adams' son, but because if you remember, he ran against Monroe when we had those two Republicans running against each other during the Air of Good Feelings. So Monroe, our fifth president, once his 2 terms are up, John Quincy Adams is going to be one of those people that can be a natural successor. But we end up with a pretty messy election in 1824. As you remember, Andrew Jackson was sort of vaulted into the national spotlight with the Battle of New Orleans and his victory there. So he's a notable war hero and running for president. So he is going to be someone who's going to get a lot of votes. In fact, Jackson is going to get the most votes of all of the candidates, all these 4 candidates that we have. We have John Quincy Adams, we have Henry Clay, who is the Speaker of the House, William H. Crawford, and then Jackson. And like I said, Jackson is going to get the most votes of all of these people, but none of them are going to have a majority. And because none of them have a majority, this election is going to go to the House. And as you can see here, we get some of that air of good feelings. We get those all 4 campaigned as Republicans. So we still have that sort of air of good feeling where everyone is identifying with the Democratic Republicans. Now that will change here briefly because Andrew Jackson is going to be the founder of our modern day Republican Party, or the modern day Democratic Party, donkey as the symbol of that party and all. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So here's the deal with the corrupt bargain. The corrupt bargain is a bargain between, I'm going to go back a slide real fastly actually. The corrupt bargain is a deal between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay and it will net John Quincy Adams the presidency. This is much like the election of 1800, or there's a lot of parallels between this and the election of 1800, where Jefferson had to make a deal with one of his rivals. Remember, that was with Hamilton at the time. Make a deal with one of his rivals to get the presidency. So Quincy Adams and Jackson are basically the two that are running against each other here. You see that Crawford has a stroke. Henry Clay finishes last of these four candidates and is eliminated from the running. So the corrupt bargain is going to be a bargain between Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams. Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson are arch enemies. Once Jackson finally leaves the White House after his presidency, he says that he only has two regrets about his presidency, and one of those regrets is that he did not shoot Henry Clay. So that just gets to the point as to how actually heated this sort of rivalry is between Clay and Jackson. So naturally, Clay is eliminated, but he's still the Speaker of the House, so he controlled the selection, and he's going to throw his weight behind John Quincy Adams. So Adams will win the presidency easily on the first ballot. But the reason we call this the corrupt bargain is because a few days later, John Quincy Adams is going to name Henry Clay his Secretary of State. So essentially, we have a little quid pro quo, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type of deal here, right? John Quincy Adams says, hey, Henry, if you throw your support behind me in the House and I get the presidency, you become Secretary of State. And remember, at the time, the cabinet is really not all that big. It's the Secretary of War, Secretary of State, Secretary of Finance. So we're not having like the big sort of cabinet that we have today. And the Secretary of State is probably the most important, the most crucial of those cabinet positions. And if you remember, John Quincy Adams was a very, very good Secretary of State. So he sort of knows the role, knows the job, knows what's going on. And he puts Henry Clay in that position right after he's elected. So that's why we call this the corrupt bargain, or at least, that's what Jackson is going to call it, and that's what it's come to known throughout history. So John Quincy Adams is going to win the presidency in 1824, and much like his father, he is only going to be a one-term president. And much like his father, his presidency is not very well perceived, either at the time or through history for that matter. He was a great Secretary of State. Remember, we talked about the treaties that he made in Canada and with Spain. Remember that even though it bears Monroe's name, the Monroe Doctrine is actually the work of John Quincy Adams. So he is an excellent Secretary of State, but he is a miserable president, and he is not going to have very much support. He's a Republican. He's not a Federalist like his father, so he probably is not going to have much Northeastern support. He's also going to tick off the South and West. As you can see here, point 3, he wanted to spend a lot of money on roads and canals, and this shouldn't come as much of a surprise, because we just talked about the American system with our last unit. The father of the American system, or one of the fathers of the American system, was Henry Clay. Henry Clay is now John Quincy Adams' right-hand man. So John Quincy Adams is going to try to continue that American system, that transportation prong of the American system with the roads and the canals. But of course, this is going to bother the South because we're getting more big federal government, and so that is going to turn the South off. And John Quincy Adams is going to turn the West off to him as well, because he wants to slow down the land grab that's going on from the Native Americans. So much like, let's say, the Proclamation of 1763, Adams tries to slow this down, trying to lessen tensions with the natives. And this is obviously going to upset Westerners. So the South doesn't like him because he's trying to increase the size of the government. The West doesn't like him because he's trying to slow down colonization and with the hopes of trying to lessen tensions with natives. And the Northeast probably isn't going to like him all that either because he's a Republican. So you can sort of see why Adams is only going to last for one term. And this corrupt bargain starting off his presidency, he really just is going to have a tough time getting anything done. So like I said, Adams is going to be a one-and-done president, and really not much to speak of other than the fact that we have the corrupt bargain to start his presidency. All right, so that's going to lead us to the election of 1828, and we're going to get into some seriously democratic, sort of the widening of this democratic reach, I guess, within the United States, if you will, where voting and public political power is going to become more widespread. But here in the, and we'll get to that in a second, but here in the election of 1828, we sort of get, again, air of good feeling style Republicans against Republicans. Jackson, being originally from North Carolina, he is a war hero, we know from the 1812, but he also fought in the Revolution. Jackson was a young child, a teenager, a young man during the American Revolution, and he is going to, in North Carolina, sort of get a reputation there as a runner. He sort of runs orders from platoon to platoon. He's not actually doing any fighting, but that's where he starts his sort of career as a fighter. And then the War of 1812. So a very popular person and a frontiersman. He sort of molds himself off of the everyday man because in North Carolina, when he was brought up, he wasn't brought up as a rich person. His family dies off early. His brothers die in the war. So he's sort of a self-made man, a poor man. And so he presents himself as a frontierman and as a commoner. And this is going to be really attractive, particularly to people in the South and particularly to people in the West. He's sort of a Westerner. Now he's from Tennessee. The South is going to like him. He grew up in North Carolina. So this is going to have a big attraction. The United States, the people, the common folk of the United States are really going to see Jackson as their champion. But this election of 1828 is really significant because this is the first time really in American political history that we get an actual campaign. In the past, you just sort of ran for election and the newspapers would say what you will, but you wouldn't get any active campaigning on the candidates' part themselves. So Jackson sort of sets up the modern day sort of campaign, if you will, or this election, not Jackson in particular, but this election of 1828 is going to set up basically our modern day political system where we have campaigns for presidency. And of course, much like our campaigns these days, the campaign of 1828 is going to get a little dirty. And by a little, I guess that's actually an understatement. It's going to get really dirty. This is a campaign of mudslinging. This is going to be stories coming out on both sides trying to attack the character of both John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. Now, the big thing to note about this is that most of the things that Adams's campaign come up with are true. So they say that his mother was a prostitute, that his wife was an adulteress. His wife had married another man before running off with Jackson. So yeah, that's actually pretty spot on. You know, she had the red letter. She was sort of a scarlet woman, if you will. So that much is true. And they're going to call Jackson a murderer, which is also true. There was a time in his youth when Jackson was betting on horses, and essentially he won a bet, and then there was a dispute as to how the bet was paid off, and this dispute ends in a duel. And this is actually a pretty interesting duel because he's dueling someone who's known for being a very good shot, a very quick shot. And when the duel flag goes down, his opponent shoots quickly, shoots first. And Jackson stands there like a monolith, like a stone. So the man believes he has missed. Jackson takes careful aim and fires second, and after taking careful aim, shoots him and mortally wounds him. So he actually kills someone as part of this duel over this gambling debt. But this is going to show how hardcore Andrew Jackson is, because after he has shot his opponent, his second notices that Jackson is bleeding, actually. And the first shot didn't, in fact, miss. It hit him right in the chest. But he stood there, stood his ground, and fired after being shot. And his second, he asks him, how in the heck did you do that? And so Jackson says something to the effect is, even if he shot me in the brain, I should have shot him back. So Jackson is a very hard man, very, very hard, very, very brave, I guess it'd be a certain way you want to say it, but this is sort of gives him his character a little bit. It shows an insight into Jackson and just the type of man he is, how unforgiving, how stubborn he is, how he refuses to lose. And that's a great way, I think, of describing Jackson, because you look at some of the things that he does as a captain and a general in battle, and he does refuse to lose. And that's going to carry with him into his presidency. He's going to have a lot of political battles that he refuses to lose. And that starts right here with this election of 1828. So you sort of see the chessboards and the billiard tables are all used to say that Adams sort of gambled in presidential places. So this is sort of some of the dirt that gets slung at Adams from Jackson.